days are getting shorter.
It's very dark very early, isn't it?
It's like crawling in a cave. Wake me up.
I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order at 7 p.m. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. My mic is on, right? Okay. Just a reminder, the role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all matter of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or court. Could we have the roll call, please?
Tel Jensen.
Here.
Sharon Watt.
Here.
Connie Taylor.
Here.
Frank Occhipinti.
Here.
And June Jones. Has anyone heard from her?
She contacted you, Travis, and she's ill tonight.
Oh,
So
thank
she's
you.
excused.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, I ask any member of the public who wishes to give testimony for items that are not on the agenda to come forward. Okay. Seeing none, we will go on to have approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Do I have a second? Okay, it's been moved and second to approve the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And then we have the approval of the minutes from October 18th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from October 18?
So moved.
I have a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
And a second. All in favor of approving the minutes from October 18th, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
For the record, that second was from Frank.
Frank.
Or from
Yeah.
Tel?
Second.
Frank. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. So now we come to the public hearing. Okay, I want to open the public record for land use application from the Port of Woodland. Is there any member of the commission who has any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest that they need to declare on this matter? Okay. All right. Hearing none, we will go to the staff presentation, please.
Great, thank you very much. So for the record, my name is Travis Goddard. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Woodland, and the presentation or the public hearing that you're going to be having tonight is for the Guild Road Industrial Park Phase 2. The applicant is the Port of Woodland, and the case numbers are BSP 2008 or dash 018, sorry, BSP dash 18-001 and SEPA 2018-003. And I have some background information for you if you'd like to take a look at the presentation that's on the screen. So I have the vicinity map. This shows exit 22 at the north end of town. You can see Walmart as the white roof there next to exit 22. As you come down Sherman, you see the site identified to the west of that by the yellow outline, and it's the several properties that are at the south end of Howard. The next thing I have for you, we are doing a binding site plan, which is essentially the industrial division of the property. And they have 10 sites identified and several tracks, and those tracks are non-developable. They are they are stormwater pond tracks. And you'll note that lot number 9 is actually what they call the orchard, and it's their park open space area. So I'll have a picture of that so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. You'll note that Howard Way enters the site from the north, and it will eventually connect up to Guild Road. And lot 10 is where the administrative building that just opened, they had their open house for the Port of Woodland. And that's on lot 10 of the binding site plan. I'll show you some quick pictures of the site so you can get oriented. This is the site looking from the corner of Robinson and Guild, and it's looking directly west. You can see that in the foreground, that white thing on a stick is the public notice, the posting that's required for the city. But you get the idea that it's pretty flat. Guild Road is on your right, and you can see the curve in it, and those trees on the left-hand side is the area that's known as the orchard, or the park area on the port property. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. So this is a picture of the entrance to the orchard, and you can see again the port office is to the right, and that's the approximate location of where Howard will connect. The next picture I have is, you can see in the foreground the existing curb gutter and sidewalk with the decorative rock that's currently in place, the parking area for the park, and you may not be able to see it very well, but in the background there is the end of Howard. So we're standing essentially in the location of where Howard will be connecting to Guild. Here is the park. If you recognize that, that's the sign that they've put up for the park space there on property. Now the next couple pictures are going to show you the south side of Guild, because there's a letter in the record and an additional letter that came in the last day or so from the attorney for the property owner to the south, so I wanted to give you an orientation. This gives you an idea of what it looks like. It has some heavily forested areas that's in part of the drainage. So we're looking at it, we're looking west, and the drainage will go into the slough that's on the left side of this photo. As you get a little farther down the curve, you can see where Guild curves around. This is the open space, or the ditch, that's on the south side of the property. And one last photo gives you a little idea that sorry you can't see this very well, but it's about 8 to 10 feet below the road level. It's kind of where the water level generally is in this drainage ditch. This is the proposed, or this is the concept for the site plan. Those buildings are not designed. They are not doing an individual site plan for any of those buildings right now. Essentially what they're creating is the lot lines, and this is a conceptual map of what the site will look like. Gives you an idea of how Howard will come south and curve around the existing trees in the park, and how it ties into the parking lot for the existing agricultural building, or I'm sorry, the existing port administrative building. This is a sample of the landscaping plan that was submitted. It shows the landscaping along the frontage, plus the internal parking standards, plus the open space and grass areas that would be associated with the stormwater ponds. These are the artist renderings that are in the package to give you an idea of what the finished project will look like. And there were two main issues associated with this project that I wanted to bring to your attention, and that is the port has an additional development proposed on the south side of Guild, and the Howard Way utilities are going to come from the end of Howard Road down to Guild. so that it will provide looped water and sewer service down to through this site, and it will also connect to the Guile Phase 1. That will not be coming before you because they don't need a binding site plan, or they're not proposing a binding site plan. It's a Type 2 staff report that's approved by staff. The other issue was brought up by the neighbor to the south, and their concern was the routing of untreated stormwater from this site into the ditch on the south side of Guile, which includes property that is within their lot. And we provided some additional information that was provided by the applicant's consultants, and it essentially said that it will not be treated, or it will be treated as part of the stormwater plan that's required for the site. And the applicant has proposed some additional stormwater improvements. If I could go back here. So initially you can see that there is a pipe coming out of Lot B, or Pond PB, under the road and dumping into the slough on the south side of the property, and that is the property that the attorney is concerned about. What they will be doing is they will be taking a pipe, and instead of outfalling directly across the street, they're proposing that it be routed to the west along Lot 7 and 8, and that it will actually outfall west of the property in question, and so it will be discharged downstream of the area of concern that was raised by the consultant or the attorney. Now, the letter that you have today on your desk when you came in, it is a second letter from the consultant, or from the attorney, that said that they had reviewed the consultant's additional information. They appreciate the port and the consultant making an effort to address their concerns. They believe it is addressed, but they would like to see a condition of approval attached to the approval that requires that the final engineering include a final solution to this. So I believe that the conditions of approval attached do address this issue, but if you have additional question, the city's engineering consultant is available if you have questions. And that is it for the staff presentation.
Okay. So, does anybody on the commission have?
I have questions. All right, turns out I received an abbreviated package with some more information, so if this is addressed in there, forgive me that indulgence here. I'm really concerned, I didn't clearly understand why there would be untreated stormwater going into the pool. Also, one of my questions was, does the document district maintain the pool through that, something where the spoils go? And so I need clarification on the stormwater issue, because I saw at the end, there were some conditions, but I wasn't really exactly clear what was happening, how it would be untreated.
Don't
And
need to address that.
I read about infiltration, but I need some clarification on that issue.
I'd be happy to participate.
Okay.
Why don't you take it back to that one? And, hi, do this, talk here and talk over there, but I need to do both.
Good luck.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rob Vanderzanden. I have a history with Woodland. Some of you know who I am, I guess. But I've been your consulting city engineer recently, and I was your public works director once, a long time ago.
Just do your best.
The letter, so the port built a pond on this site about 10 years ago, and the letter from the attorney for Tom Wilson said that they believe that this water should go to the pond on this site in order to get treated. And the problem with that statement is that it's just incorrect. And we didn't really dispute all the lack of facts in that letter, because we did determine that there was a problem that needed to be solved. All of the incorrect information wasn't that relevant. there was never a possibility that the stormwater from this site would be taken to the other site because that pond was not designed, that's not what it was designed for. The letter says it was designed for that, but it wasn't. These ponds that you see in this image, there's a pond on site B, a pond on site A, a pond on a site that doesn't have a number on it here, but I think it's C. All of those are the treatment and detention ponds that would be there for the purpose of treating the stormwater. And so this plan has always had the intent of treating the stormwater. It was just incorrectly represented by Tom Wilson's attorney in that
Well,
letter.
that was confusing reading between the two documents because it's like, okay, so retention ponds, I know you have to kind of meter the water in.
Yes.
I understand that clearly, and I understand you're using infiltration, but are these?
Not in this case. There will not be infiltration used. Yeah, this site is not a good infiltration site.
Okay.
There may be some minor element of infiltration, but primarily the design is there's two parts to the design, and there is treatment swales. So there will be in between the buildings and in areas of the site there will be stormwater swales, and that's where the treatment will occur, and then the detention will occur in the ponds.
So it's treated upstream of the pond.
Yes.
And I show this picture because it's a good sample if you happen to drive by or if you're familiar with it, that they do have an existing swale on the port admin building site that you can see there, and so it's an example of how they will do water quality and quantity retention on site. So
I also had a question about the documents you're between the slough. I'd like to answer that. So I understand
Do you have an answer?
a little
Yes.
more about how this-
So, and today we did have the Dyking engineer Patrick Harbison in for another meeting, and we did ask him about that. And the Dyking district does not maintain this part of the slough. I think it is part of the overall drainage that if there was a particular reason that somebody needed to step in, they might, but they don't keep it on their rolls for active maintenance. And so I don't think there really is any maintenance, and I don't think there has been any maintenance for a very long time.
Industrial park with further demand and creating.
I believe that the answer on that is probably not, because the whole idea of the detention ponds is that the amount of flow, is not increasing. But it's also likely that there will be a point in time when it would be appropriate to go in there and clear it out a little bit. So, and I'm not, and I.
And where would the spoils go in that?
I think the answer to that would be that would be at the time of the work, because they would have to be removed and taken off-site, and so it'd be just figured out when they get there for that. And I think there is a possibility that it will fall into the city's area to take that responsibility.
And can I also just clarify, it may also be Cowlitz County's responsibility, Public Works, as opposed to the Dyking District. Is that a fair statement?
Because
isn't that technically a county drainage?
Only because the portion of the road currently at the very far end of Guild Road, the last 500 feet before the intersection with Robinson, is still in the county, not annexed to the city at this time. The county would have some responsibilities out there. The presumption is that would be for the near future.
Okay, are there any other questions on part of a commissioner?
I have one more question. You can answer from there, but the pipes, they're 12-inch pipes. Are they sized for future needs or?
I think the answer is that in this case, everything to the north is already addressed. The next parcel to the north is the Pacific, the
Columbia Precast.
Columbia Precast. And they have taken all their drainage to the north, so there won't actually, the pipes that are crossing the road will only carry the drainage to the port's site here, and there wouldn't be any future other needs. The pipes are sized for this site.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Just for clarification, this site is now in the town presently?
It is.
Okay. And it's already been zoned, and it's conforming with zoning. So, that's good. So I was looking at the transportation, can we talk about transportation for a minute?
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was looking at the traffic impact analysis report, and I don't know if there's anyone here who can speak to this, but I did have kind of a question about what they base the peak 2022 PM peak hour traffic operations. So the prediction is that the peak traffic operation is going to be that's 8:22 PM, right? Is that right? Correct? 2022?
Got the big book.
All right, page.
I believe that the 2022 has to do with the year. So I think
Well-
the observation was that this was the port is doing a number of projects in their phase, and so we selected a target for when to look at. So one of the things that you have happening with transportation is that as you go into the future, you not only have this development happening, but you have background growth because you've got other things happening. You've got other growth happening throughout.
Well,
So
wait, 2022 PM is the,
So it's
The
the
year?
2022 PM peak hour. So most of the time when we're talking about transportation analysis, we're talking about what's happening in the PM peak hour. So the question is, well, is there enough capacity on the road? If you go out there at noon, or if you go out there at 4 PM, you have a completely different situation. So normally what we'll do with transportation analysis is we'll target our analysis for the PM peak hour, which is when you have the most traffic. There's an AM peak hour, there's a PM peak hour. In general, when you look at all the numbers, most of the time, the PM peak hour is your critical number. So this issue has to do with what is the situation that we're evaluating for traffic capacities. And the situation that we're evaluating is far enough out in the future that the development would have occurred. So 2022 was the target for that. And then the PM peak hour situation, where the highest level of traffic is
so
happening.
what is that hour, the PM peak hour? Normally?
Normally
5
4 to
o'clock?
5. 4 to 5 is normally
Okay.
the hour.
Oh, okay.
So in the course of this
I got
effort,
confused.
yeah, in the course of this effort, they would have gone out and done actual traffic counts, and they may have come up with a slightly different PM peak hour. For example, it might be more precisely from 4:30 to 5:30. There will have been a PM peak hour that comes out of their traffic counts, but ultimately, one of the things that the transportation engineers do is they'll say, well, these are industrial buildings, and these industrial buildings will generate a certain number of trips on an average day, and then a certain number of those trips will occur during the PM peak hour. And normally that's about 10% of the trips. So if one of those buildings generated 150 trips in a day, then 15 of them would occur in the PM peak hour typically. And so they're putting all of that together, projecting it out to 2022.
Oh, okay. So I see on page 161, traffic impact mitigation needs. No adverse traffic operational impacts have been identified with or without the proposed Guild Road 2 Industrial Park. Quarterly, no impact. So basically, the feeling is there's not going to be any significant traffic impact from this?
That's correct. the recommendation, the staff recommendation does not include any impact mitigation for traffic other than the city's transportation impact fees that the city will charge, which would go toward capital projects in the future. But, so what we asked the applicant to do in the course of this was to study, I believe, 6 critical intersections. They included the Sherman and Guile intersection, the Sherman and Dyke intersection,
Yeah.
the interchange, Pacific, and they looked at all of those intersections and said, if we put this many more trips on them, they'll still function at a level of service that's appropriate, so. And because of that, there isn't a need for any mitigation.
Right.
If they had dropped below level of service D, which is our standard for the city, then there may have been a need to, for example, signalize an intersection.
Seems a little bit of a gray area to me, because, I mean, I'm not really sure what's going to happen out here in these buildings.
It's true. It's true.
I mean, how can you really predict
Yeah.
the impact? So what is I mean, I haven't, maybe it's not part of the deal here. Does the port have an idea of what is going to happen out there? Or is there any information about that?
Shall I talk about it, or do you want to talk about it? So I think that the answer is, there's 2 parts to the answer, and one is that what the transportation engineer will do is rely on tables that are there. So, for example, in this case, there's been some assumptions made that there's going to be warehousing and manufacturing.
Okay.
And there's basic warehousing manufacturing tables.
Okay.
Now, there's certainly a business out there that could come along and use dramatically more trips. And what the situation would be with the city in an instance like that is that we would go back to this process where we have received a transportation study from the applicant that says warehousing and manufacturing. And if they're going to come in with, I can't think of an example, but something that generated 3 times as many trips, then the city would need to ask for another transportation study. But the assumption is going into this that even though the port doesn't have any specific clients lined up for these future buildings, that an analysis that is based on manufacturing and warehousing, I think a relatively equal split of manufacturing and warehousing is representative of what the port typically does, and therefore appropriate for this analysis.
And so this development might take 10 years to complete, or what's the projected?
I mean, I think it's all about the market, and somewhat based on that was why we picked the 2022 target, because it was
to be complete.
It was
Okay.
a target that is probably, I don't want to speak for Jennifer, but it's probably a bit optimistic to think that we'll have.
Right, I see. So you're kind of platting this
Yeah.
and getting it all ready.
Yeah,
Okay, well, thank you very much.
you bet.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Phil? No?
Just looking at this, just wondering why if we're approximately 170 trips will be generated at full build-out, there's 283 parking spaces.
That's a good question. This is a theoretical, to give you an idea of what you're looking at. Just like for the transportation, they've done some kind of generic drawings. Each individual site would be responsible for doing a site plan, and those footprints could be modified based upon an individual site plan, but it's kind of a generic plan to show you that they could do adequate parking. Theoretically, if they were to do some different type of warehouse, they might trade some of those for truck parking or for truck loading areas, which aren't necessarily shown on this plan. But they did that mostly to convince the planner, me, that they could conceivably do some pretty generic industrial development there and not run into a parking problem where they're parking out on the streets or in the neighborhood around it.
Okay, so are we ready for the applicant's presentation? then? Okay.
I just saw the speaker today talking about surface water body, and I understand that it's going to go to the Lord's Lagoon.
the Guile Road.
And it says, will the project require any work over and adjacent to within 200 feet of the described waters? Isn't that smooth? Isn't the water of the state?
It is not. No,
But it is the surface water.
it is surface water.
Why would you think
Well, and in, because it's not a shoreline of the state, typically what they're referring to is a shoreline, which is 200 cubic feet per second. CFS, yeah, or 20 acres of surface area. So that would be under the shoreline program. And in this case, it's not a water of the state.
Okay, so, thank you. I just-
All right, anything else? Okay, then think we can go to the applicant presentation.
Not saying that.
Ms. Keen?
For the record, my name is Jennifer Ray Keene. Sorry, just got married. And I am the executive director of the Port of Woodland. We have submitted our binding site plan for Guild Road Industrial Park 2, which is in front of you for consideration of approval. Not sure if there's anything else. To address some of the questions that I heard, just so you know, what we're looking at is doing 2 industrial parks actually at the same time. The reason why we went forward with this one is because of the extension of Howard Way, building those utilities to meet the needs for Guild Industrial Park 1. The part of the requirement when we started the discussions back in 2014 about Guild Road 1 was that we had to extend Howard Way and bring in the water and sewer to meet the needs of that park. That also required the port to purchase additional parcels, which 2 of the parcels were 1 and 4, 5 and 6, part of 7 there. Those were purchased at that time so that we could do a full build out of an industrial park. The parcel that we had originally was only 8 acres, and a feasibility study was conducted that showed that it wasn't feasible to have an industrial park on such a small parcel. So that led to the port purchasing that the additional parcels. That transaction closed in January 2016, which then we moved forward with our finishing our feasibility study and started with the concept of Guild Road 2. So, to address the issue of where are we going with this? We find our niche is light manufacturing and warehousing. We own Downriver Drive Industrial Park. If you're familiar with that, there's multiple buildings there. It's the same type of clientele that we see. The interest that we have is those type of industries. Some of those buildings, they're 5,000 square feet. To give you approximate what we look with tenants, 5,000 square foot space would, we have somewhere between 5 to 10 employees in that space. Some of our tenants have office space, so it was part of the parking consideration that was brought up was again because that you take a manufacturing, you take or light manufacturing and warehousing, but you also have a component of office space. So we're not trying to be delusional that it's just, you know, this is only going to be manufacturing and there's 5 people in a potential space of, you know, 10 to 20,000 square feet. Is that most of what we find with tenants is that 10% of their space is usually office space. So that's why you have a little bit more parking area. And we have seen that notorious with trucks for delivery need more space, and they like to park not in the spaces per se for easier access. So we just try to learn from how we constructed Downriver Drive, and then also not to have the issues that we see at Sherman Way with like Perry Farm Works, where you see a lot of parking along Port Way. We wanted them to confine their parking within the industrial park and not on the outside roads along Howard or on Guild. So if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer what I do know.
Any questions?
And just so you're aware, we have applied for federal funding for this project. So the feds will most likely be reviewing this as well. And the funding will be reviewed next month. So
Oh, whether they want to.
fund the entire project or not.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So I mean, just from the little time I've spent on the planning board, the key, any development that happens in Woodland is going to really impact our traffic situation. And I think that's really kind of the big question. But it seems like from the studies that it's not an issue, and there's not a lot past you guys, right? I mean, it's not like
Not at this time.
At this time, but
And that's why the city and the port have developed a partnership to look at the 460 acres, knowing that behind us is going to further impact us. And we know that transportation, no matter what, is an issue for Woodland. We're not trying to ignore the issue. We're trying to be good partners and stewards to figure out a solution. We just see that, with what our existing industrial parks and the fact that this grows, we hope that we will have those answers in the future and the near future, if we can get this, once we get the feasibility study underway, is to figure out what we can do about 22 and 21. We've been active in those conversations about trying to figure out another on-ramp but the port's mission is to create jobs, and those jobs obviously feed into paying for infrastructure. So that's why we are part of the conversation now. We do notice that also a lot of our tenants, we have pretty active conversations with a lot of our tenants about when we talk about leases with them, about what time they have staff come on and come off. We've actually taken that in consideration to a tenant or a client that had discussed a parcel actually at Sherman Way, and we decided because of their peak, it would actually impact Sherman Way further, which would have required us to do more rail improvements. And we said, that's not something we're willing to do right now. So we do take a pretty strong look at how the transportation is, and talking with Tracy and Travis about, okay, is this really, what is this going to do? What we hope is that some of the traffic will go Howard, some of the traffic will go Guild as they exit. It really depends, what type of traffic, and if Howard's clear. Obviously, Howard has a bend further down as it accesses Sherman. Is this going to be, what's going to be the clear route? Neither road is a clear route for trucks. And now that I'm down there every day, I kind of see it a little bit more of how the trucks are coming by and or anything. We're not sure how exactly, the traffic's going to go. So it'll probably be a further consideration for any client we bring in. That's going to be a consideration they're going to make. But we do know that this plan of having a variety of options for tenants or potential clients, I would say the biggest one for consideration would be Lot 2 of potentially having, because it would have it's quite a large space. If you're what we're looking at, I mean, potentially what 2 could be is what you're looking at PDM steel and the size of that. But we don't have the laydown yard and such measures. So that's going to, we've already had potential clients looking at that option. Well, you don't have the laydown yard. That's because they're going to have more trucks, they're going to have more traffic. That doesn't work for them. And we tell them, you might want to look at the 25 acres at Sherman. That might be a better option for you. So they already take it in consideration of how they can get their trucks in and out and their people in and out. So.
I don't know what the solution to that traffic problem is, but I know it's not your problem.
Well, it is our problem because, for us, with a client coming in, that is a concern for them. And their employees coming here, their, companies coming here, they're businesses coming here, they want solutions too. And that is why the commission decided to take an active role of trying to figure out, okay, if Scott's not going to happen, then what's going to happen? Because people have to come in somewhere.
Taking the lead on that, on solving the traffic problem. Who's taking the lead on that, Travis?
The city and the Department of Transportation are working on that. So we have a regional transportation authority that we also participate in.
Right. And the feds are involved, et cetera. So kind of a complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have any more questions.
Anyone else have any questions for Ms. Keen? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will open the, to public testimony. Anyone who is in support of this proposal can come forward and testify now. Anyone? Okay. Are there any who are neutral to this proposal to come forward and testify? No? Are there any in opposition to come forward and testify? Okay, I guess not. So, anything else, Travis, to add, or no? So, okay. So I guess we are closing public testimony then. Anything else we want to talk about before we get to a motion?
So we're trying to work towards a motion of recommendation? or-
To the city council.
And we're not recommending that they
Yeah.
approve this?
We can make a motion to approve this proposal. We can make a motion to approve it with conditions, or we can make a motion to deny it.
I would like to make a motion that we, forward this on to city council with the condition of the multi-district.
So there are a number of conditions here. Yeah, so the, yeah. The extra one that's not in the packet, yeah.
Let's see, so the, so he did not include a specific condition of approval, only asking that you ensure that the stormwater ordinance be consistent with state regulation. And so I was looking at condition 13, which says, a draft covenant for stormwater maintenance and access for inspection document shall be submitted for review prior to approval of the binding site plan, and format of the covenant document shall be requested from the Public Works Department. Actually, sorry, it might be number 14.
Which
Read
page
the-
are you on, please?
So that is page,
And is that Public Works or is it our city engineer? I
he,
mean, it
he does
seems
that
like
under authority of the Public Works Director.
Thank you, I know you were.
Is that a correct answer? Would you? 16, page 16.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So condition number 14 on page 16. Redesign the site plan to adjust the location of the stormwater outfall to eliminate impacts to private property as demonstrated in the comment letter on behalf of Tom and Linda Wilson in a manner acceptable to the Public Works Director. So that requires that they address the issues as outlined in that letter, and that the Public Works Department, including the city engineer, would have the authority to review and approve that prior to construction. Actually, sorry, prior to final approval of the engineering plans.
Aren't
Which-
you already covered then?
Yes.
I mean, so we could just make a motion to approve and forward this on to city council.
Yes. And Armand, who is the gentleman the attorney who wrote those letters on
Yes.
behalf of the neighborhood, when I talked to him, he said he felt that the city had done what it needed to address those issues, and he didn't necessarily feel like he needed to show up tonight. So he was considering not coming. So apparently he didn't show up because he felt that it was adequately addressed. So whether or not
I
he-
appreciate that clarification because, we're getting new information tonight that wasn't in our package. So I have a motion on the
Okay.
floor.
Okay, so the motion is to forward this to the city council with a recommendation to approve it. Is there a second?
If I have a concern, is now the time to voice it, or are we voting?
Yes.
After,
Let the second
you can
vote.
second it and then we can discuss. Seconding it is not, doesn't mean you want.
If there is a second, you can still discuss it.
I'm going to second that motion.
Okay.
Back to your chest.
Seconded by Tal, and your concern?
Oh. I guess I'm a little hung up on the traffic issue. I don't really believe that there's going to be no impact, although it looks like a pretty thorough and complicated study. No impact, I mean, if there's no planning, like, we don't have to put any traffic lights in, or there's no changes in anything except for continuation of this road. You know what I'm saying? And who's going to bear the burden of that? Like, the development comes in, and then we have to improve our infrastructure. Shouldn't we be kind of considering that and the impacts?
So I think the idea, and whether or not you think it's adequate, is that that's covered in the transportation impact.
Oh, impact fees,
Yeah,
okay.
which is, again, on page 16, 36, that's
So they are paying
$36,000, 36
to mitigate any kind of possible.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And I would like to point out that those are projected, and that the individual site plan will determine what the actual trip projection would be for each individual lot, and they will pay their portion of that, and it may end up being more or less, depending on how much traffic each individual site prepares.
So, in a situation like this where, these are going to be leased buildings, and there might be different businesses in there over the years that have different, you look up in the trip generation manual, you're going to have different numbers in there. How does that change the traffic impact?
So typically, if there is a change of use, it would trigger a new site plan, but generically, there may not be individual site plans. If they apply for building permits, that's actually when the trip generation is, or the trip impact fees are collected. So if they were to come in to convert, say, from a warehouse to an office building, we would take a quick couple minutes to calculate whether or not there's a difference in the trip generation, or if they do an addition, that's additional floor space, so it would require additional calculations at that time.
Okay, are there any other concerns to voice? Okay, we have a motion that has been seconded to send this to the city council for approval. Are we ready to vote then? Okay, all in favor? Do you want a roll call of this? Okay.
It's up to you.
Okay. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Can I abstain?
Sure,
I'd like to abstain.
okay. Okay. So, we have closed the public hearing for this item. And we now have a discussion workshop, correct? So we could have a staff presentation for this?
Actually, if you're ready.
Oh.
Oh, just let me know and I'll change this off.
Hi, good evening. My name is Liza Moorhead. I am a researcher and consultant at Portland State University. I am the manager of a program called the Housing Data Hub, where we look at regional housing data for the 7-county metro area and for Portland and sometimes areas outside of the state. I was doing some research about municipal housing plans, and I contacted Travis, who invited me to come and speak to you about some regional housing trends and how they are playing out in Woodland. So I'm going to talk a little bit about population, households, housing stock, mobility, migration, market conditions, and affordability. And I encourage you, if you have any questions or would like some clarification on anything, please stop me as I go. So first, populations and households. I wanted to take a quick look at who lives here and how are these households changing or being impacted by outside trends. It's a little hard to see this slide. So looking at the towns surrounding Woodland, it looks like your town is growing much faster than some of the neighboring communities, with a 64% increase in population between 2000 and 2018. And I also found, I'm sure this is not big news to you, but to ground me a little bit in the community, that there are about 1,700 households. The vast majority of those family households, average household size is 3.2 people, and 60% of the households have children under 18. The one thing that I did find, which I thought was particularly interesting, and this is based on 5-year census data, so it's kind of wide time periods, but is that the number of vacant housing units has increased pretty dramatically from 2007-2011, when it was about 5%, to more than 17% in the most recent 5-year census period.
What does that mean, vacant housing units?
It's exactly what it sounds like: apartments and houses that nobody is living in when the census comes through. So
The data just goes, your most recent data is 2007.
it's actually 2016. The 2017 data will be out in December. So it is a wide time period, but it was interesting to me because for a lot of the communities in the region, very low housing vacancy is the issue, and it looks like the housing vacancy here has increased. I am not deeply grounded in this community, so it's very possible that there is an explanation that Travis or somebody else has for that data.
I don't have an explanation for that.
There's more vacant.
That's surprising, yeah.
Huh?
It is surprising, yeah.
So I also looked at the
I mean, that kind of incongruent with all the seen before. I mean, there seems to be no need for housing here, so I mean, this is, what is your source? Just census data, or what are you using as a source?
For that's the American Community Survey from the census, and it could be that there is a big mismatch between housing that's available and housing that people are looking for. It could be a quality of housing issue. So there could be vacant housing that isn't up to the standards that the population is looking for. So it would.
Yeah, that sounds like Woodland.
Would you be able at the end, to provide us?
Oh, sure. And I can also, if there's anything that comes up that you'd like more information on, I could follow up on it. So I also looked at the components of population change. This data is available at the county level, so I looked at Cowlitz County. The blue is natural increase, so there are more people being born than people dying, and the gray or the purple is the net migration. So it looks like in the last 10 years or so, there's been more migration than natural increase. That means that there are more people moving into the community to account for the increase in population than a baby boom or something like that changing the makeup of the community.
What's the outlier that's down at the bottom? That looks peculiar.
So that was in 2009, 2010, more people moved away than moved in. So I don't know why that happened.
Session.
Sorry?
That's what I would think.
So next I'm going to talk a little bit about housing stock. Looking at the housing unit type in Woodland, majority of the housing units are single family, which makes sense looking at the average price of housing and the household size for families. I also looked at the increase in these, and it looks like the increase in single-family housing accounts for the increase, most of the increase in all of the housing units, and there's much less impact from apartment buildings, duplexes, or mobile homes. And that has just a typo that goes from, yeah, and in the title it says 2016, so that's it. So to follow up on that, I looked at building permits for newly owned private housing units, and you can see that after the recession, and this, pattern is the same everywhere, that there was a huge drop-off in the number of permitted units, and in particular, housing units that were more than one unit have not really come back at all, except for a very brief addition in 2010, which were probably units that were already in plans and going when the recession hit. So in 2004, there was much more of a mix of apartments and duplexes going in, and since then, since the recession, even though there's been an uptick in single-family construction, larger units or large buildings with more than one unit have not rebounded.
And is that for the entire Longview statistical area, or that's?
So it is, but the Longview statistical area is contiguous with Cowlitz County, so it's for the county.
Okay. Because I was going to say, those numbers look like county-wide unit, not just, because our growth follows this trend, but it's about a third of that. Like for this year, so far, we're probably at about 40 units to date.
So I also wanted to compare the building permits to new household formation. And you can see the new households is the blue line, that since before the recession until 2017, the most recent data that's available, and again, this is for Cowlitz County, there hasn't really been too much of a change in the number of new households that are forming each year, but there has been a massive decline in the number of new building permits, leading to what it sounds like you're already aware of, a housing crunch, or possibly some people doubled up in households when they would choose not to be. So I also want to talk about a little bit about mobility and migration. I touched on migration earlier, looking at population increase. So here I'd like to talk specifically about mobility, mainly in terms of where people who live here work and where people who work here live. So here we've mapped, this is where Woodland residents go to work, and so it's a little hard to see on this map, but red line are people who earn more than $40,000 a year, and the rest of the lines are people who earn $40,000 or less. And then this just has to do with income. But you can see that this is where people are going to work, so there are a lot of trips, all the way as far south as Portland, up to Longview. I'm sure this isn't news to you, but it looks like a lot of people are leaving the city to go to work. And then I had a question about, what is that?
Just be the dam.
Okay, that was a little bit outside of our knowledge, so we were curious when we made the map.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the resolution on
But
what's the resolution on those destinations?
they're block groups, so the residents and the offices both, or the work sites both, are block groups. And they're offset a tiny bit for confidentiality, but not enough that it would massively alter the data. I also wanted to see how long people were commuting, and I went ahead and threw this chart in, but as you can see, it doesn't really, with the margin of error, it's not very useful. Basically, you can see that people commute, it's less than an hour probably, but other than that, it's not very useful information, unfortunately, since the sample size was so low for the town. And then I also looked at people who work here and where they commute from. And the chart on the side is the inflow-outflow of job counts, and this is for 2015. Unfortunately, this is the most recent data available. So you can see that there are more than 3,000 people who are employed here, who live outside, less than 2,000 people who live in the selected area and are employed outside, and about 400 people who are both work and live in town. So that's a pretty good inflow-outflow balance. You don't have as many people traveling outside the city, and it sounds like you have a pretty good job share. To clarify on the map, again, the darker blue are people who have higher incomes, more than $40,000 a year, and the lighter blue are people who earn less than $40,000 a year. And then in the top, those are people, the endpoint for that line is people working in Olympia.
So you said those numbers look pretty good as far as people moving in and out for work?
It means that you have a lot more jobs here than people who are working. There are, as far as the people who live and work here, that number could be a little higher, but you're bringing in workers and bringing in some of their dollars. So next I want to talk a little bit about market conditions and what I can see here in the county and how it relates to some wider regional trends. So I looked at the median sale price for single-family homes, and unfortunately this data isn't available from Redfin for the town itself, but I could look at the county and how that relates to the towns nearby. We can see similar patterns here as we've seen throughout the rest of the region, is that housing prices are increasing, starting to drop a little bit, although it doesn't look like that has hit this part of the region as much as other places. Longview has both the most expensive housing and the housing that is increased the most. This data goes from 2012 to September 2018, which is the most recent data available. So I also looked at the average sale to list price, and here we're looking at Clark County and Cowlitz County. For a while, when the housing market was really hot in the metro region, we were seeing sale to list prices that were up to 110, 115, 120%. It doesn't look like that has affected the housing market here quite as much, but we're starting to see it drop off a little bit, but still that people are, often paying more for a house than it's listed for. And these are all residential units, so I've been saying house, but it includes apartments, townhouses. So I was also looking at days on the market. You can see here that this, to some degree, follows a annual pattern. Houses stay on the market longer in the winter than they do in the summer. But again, we can see around 2015, especially in through the summer of 2016, houses started to really drop and were selling faster and faster, and now they're starting to stay on the market a little bit longer. Again, this is a trend that we saw hit more closer in Portland, Vancouver, Camas, where houses were staying on the market for 2 days, 3 days, and that's starting to really follow the same pattern here, where we're going from just a few days to 10, 15, 20 days.
Sorry, it changed.
I also looked at new listings for residential units. Again, there are a couple of things that we can see in this chart. One is the seasonal pattern. You know, more listings go on in the summer, they sell faster than in the winter. But we can also see that there are more and more units being added in Clark County than Cowlitz County, which makes sense, but it's a more dramatic shift. So construction is outpacing, construction growth are outpacing in that larger county. And then I want to talk a little bit about affordability, which is, of course, the match of how much people earn and can spend on housing with the price of the housing where they want to live. So this is showing the hourly minimum wage versus the wage needed to afford a 2-bedroom unit at fair market rent in Cowlitz County. Fair market rent is determined by HUD, and this is for a 2-bedroom unit. So the Washington minimum wage is in blue, and the wage needed to afford a fair market rent is in red. And so this actually looks really good. The Washington minimum wage is increasing fairly steadily, almost as steadily as the housing costs are increasing, not quite. Clearly, it would be challenging for someone working a minimum wage job in Washington to afford a 2-bedroom unit on one salary, but looking at people who are living in smaller houses or apartments, or people in dual income households, which is, you know, increasingly what many of us live in, it's not actually that bad of a match. Of course, minimum wage is just one earning point, so I also want to look at average hourly earnings for Cowlitz County and the distribution of jobs by wage. So average hourly earnings, I looked at Cowlitz County compared to Washington State. The growth curves are almost identical. Cowlitz County is, you know, has a lower average hourly earning, but if you take out the Seattle metro area, it doesn't really look that different, and it's positive to see the growth being so consistent together. And then distribution of jobs by wage, the 50th percentile, so the median wage in the county is just under $40,000, which ties closely to the commuting maps we looked at, where the breaking point was just about $40,000. And then the last thing I pulled was to look at interest rates. So this is something that's having a pretty dramatic effect on the housing market throughout not just the local region, but across the country. 30-year mortgage interest rates are increasing up to an average of about 5%, which is making a big impact in keeping people from moving into the market. 2 years ago, interest rates were significantly lower, and there was more churn in the housing market, and this is really keeping people from moving into that next house or that first house that they are interested in. And so I think that's all that I pulled for this. Okay.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Can I ask you a quick question? I want to back up to one of these slides. What this one tells me is the average sale or the average price.
It's a sale to list price. So if I listed my house for $250,000, but sold it for $275,000.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so just, your closing comments on Woodland.
Are we doing okay?
What do you think? What conclusion are you reaching?
So that's an interesting question because the one piece, so I looked at housing, which is my specialty. I didn't look as much at employment, which is a big missing piece. I was impressed at the availability and affordability of housing here compared to what I mostly see. And it looks like people aren't commuting as far as a lot of the people further south in the Portland metro are commuting. I also spent some time looking at houses for sale online, as is my job and my hobby. And it looked like there were a lot of, that houses are significantly more affordable here than other places within the region. Although, it seems like it could be concerning that there is not as much multifamily development happening here, especially if there is a lot of industrial development on the horizon.
That's an interesting comment, because we just talked about having all this industrial development. And I was kind of reading up about the mission of the port and everything, and I don't know that much about ports and what their real mission is, but part of it is employment. Living wage is kind of mandated, I think. So, kind of makes me wonder, like, are we bringing the kind of jobs to Woodland that people can afford to buy a house?
I don't know, but I guarantee you that the port has thought about that.
They have some.
I would guess so. I would assume that a public port has thought about that. I think that is generally part of the industrial, like the contracts and job searching are finding jobs that are a benefit to the community.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking, well, why industrial? Why not high-tech jobs? Like, why aren't we trying to bring in high-tech jobs or something? You know, like a little, I mean,
Is that what your
I think
labor
about
force
these
is?
things.
Is your labor force prepared to take high-tech jobs?
Our workforce?
Yeah, because if you bring in high-tech jobs and your labor force isn't prepared to fill them, you're just going to cause gentrification in your town.
Oh, I see. Well, we're talking about a lot of development, housing development also, kind of on the periphery. I don't know if they're involved in that. But, you know, supposedly, you know, a lot of houses could go in south of town, a couple thousand or something. So if you don't, you know, I don't know, just the dynamics of that kind of interests me a little bit. So you're saying with the type of jobs we're bringing in to our town, we need more multi-family housing?
I'm saying maybe. I don't know what type of jobs you're bringing in. I am saying that there was a stoppage in permitting of multifamily units. And so the multifamily housing stock isn't being replenished at the same rate that the single-family housing stock is. So either you're going to end up with the only available multifamily housing that gets older, maybe gets run down, maybe isn't as nice.
Our comprehensive plan has a policy that expresses a desire for a 60-40 single-family, multifamily split. Is there a rule of thumb, or is that typical for the area, or the desire versus the reality?
It depends so much on the community. I mean, I would say that you want to make sure that the housing stock that's being permitted and built, single family and multifamily, is matching the community needs and is going to match with new industry that comes in. So if you only build $600,000 houses, but you're bringing in lots of jobs that pay $20 an hour, it's
Good point.
Okay, I have a question for you. In looking at trends, I mean, I think Woodland is a little bit of an anomaly because we're so close to Clark County, and we're getting this northern movement of people moving this way. And I have done, not you, but I've done some of my own research, but Cowlitz County as a whole is a little bit different than Clark County in terms of all the statistics. But I think Woodland is in, from a trend perspective, with people moving into Washington from Clark to Cowlitz. Have you taken into account any of these issues in terms of trends in mobility and Woodland itself and its location to Clark County?
So I didn't look specifically at where people are moving from. I think it makes clearly Woodland's growing faster than communities further north in Cowlitz County. And in general, as housing gets more expensive coming from Vancouver and Portland moving out, and there's new residential development here, it makes sense to me that people would be moving from Vancouver, Camas area here, since it is really accessible still to those areas, and even to, I mean, you saw there were a lot of people moving, even a lot of people who aren't earning that much commuting as far south as Portland. So I think that's probably is where a lot of the in-migration is coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Can't prove it right now.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, very good.
And Travis, should we enroll that presentation?
Yes, I have an electronic copy of it now.
Okay, so I see we're going to have a comprehensive plan update.
So we have, so we are in the process of having our 5 open houses. The second one was today. You have the individual scenarios still up on the wall from the open houses. As people come in, I'm kind of walking them through what we're considering, handing out surveys. The first open house, we had 19 attend, only 16 signed in, but we had 19 by my count. Today we had 3 sign in, but only 5 came in today, so a couple of them were repeat offenders. So I talked to them before, so they didn't sign in because I already had their information. But we'll continue to have a couple more. I think we have another on next Monday, Liza? So I have, thank you. So I have 3 more scheduled, and I will keep you up to date as they go. But the next time we will be talking about it is discussing kind of the outcomes at the December 20th Planning Commission meeting, at which time you will be taking a look at what a permit number, I believe it's 2018-10, which is the city permit for the city permit number for review of the growth scenarios, at which time I'll be asking you to make a recommendation on to which scenario I should be applying to the cases. And the 8 individual cases will be reviewed by you in the 2 January hearings, which are the 10th and the 17th. So I think we're going to group them that the 4 internal requests will be done on January 10th, and the external requests for expansion of the growth area will be reviewed on the 17th. So,
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
So are you saying that the 20th is going to be a public
the 17th will be a public hearing, and
December?
December 20th
20th will be public.
will be a public hearing. On one of the cases, and the city is the applicant on that case, it is not one of the 8 applicants who are asking to expand the urban growth area. What I will be asking you is to make a recommendation on the growth scenario.
All right, so I guess I'd just like to have a discussion among the commission. Does that meet, does that mean, do we have a problem with the parents by having public hearing on a comprehensive plan so close to the holiday, where you'll probably get limited attendance just due to the date? And then question number two is, having public hearing during the date timeframe on in January, does that also limit public participation? And does that give an appearance of not allowing public participation? I really think we need to, these are important issues.
So Frank and Lane can weigh in with a legal opinion. My personal opinion is the answer to that is it's not going to be a problem because the original notification and the discussion was part of the notices that went out last month for the hearing schedules. And so people will have had almost 2 months of notice that it is coming. They have 5 open house opportunities to come in and give us their input, and that input will go to you as part of the process. And so you will be seeing the input in its raw form, and you will also be getting my interpretation of the input that has occurred. So for them to have 5 opportunities and 2 months of notice, plus public hearing notice, plus the opportunity to show up at the hearing, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to have a solid legal argument to challenge.
Yeah,
But
I'm
we-
just worried about potential litigation or stuff, because I know that from my previous background in life, that, sometimes you push these things for a date that, may or may not be favorable.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that, from potential legal, to address that with some quality.
You want to change the date?
I
Is
mean,
that what you're saying?
I mean, my thought is that in terms of legal, there's nothing illegal about what you're doing. There is no mandatory, you must hold hearings at night or weekends or something like that that I'm aware of. The issue is whether is more of a managerial one of planning for success. You do have problems. I think the observation of 20 December is pretty close to Christmas. People are Christmas shopping and families are coming home. Right. The one restriction that you do have that you can discuss amongst yourselves is that the earliest that the council could actually vote on a change in the comp plan is in February. That does not mean that if you don't think that's enough, you could expand into February. I mean, if you wanted to hold the meetings further, I mean, it's work on your part, but if your recommendations don't go to the council until March, nothing bad happens, other than if that has not given you enough time or whatever. Because it is hard. I mean, there's going to be a lot of, there's a lot of applications being done. And one time, one of the attorneys in there said, you really don't want to sit there all day going through a hearing, because in the 10th or 12th hour, you may have quality issues. But if you don't think that the 10th and the 17th is sufficient, it's your schedules, it's Travis' schedules, you can regroup on that, because you don't have to get your recommendation to the city council by February 1st. And the smarter the commission is at the end of the process, the smarter the city council will be at the beginning of its process.
So we could have the first public hearing at January.
Yes, I don't know of any legal reason that would preclude that.
I just think that looks, has a better look to the community about an opportunity
would you want to do 3 in January, or what? I guess that, I mean, that's what the commission needs to figure out, is what's the consensus, because these dates, I would listen closely to Travis, but these dates are something that you can play about, because you want a good product to go up to the council.
All right, so my next question is, if our next meeting is on the 20th of December,
Excuse me.
I would feel much more comfortable having as much information prior to that meeting as possible. And it almost seems to me like reviewing all the information with this commission on the 20th might be better than doing that to a public hearing. I'm open to talk, but I need to raise these concerns because I believe that we need to talk about it.
The only thing that you have to, that you have to consider from a legal perspective is that at a regular meeting of the planning commission, you can talk about anything you want to. You're not limited to the agenda. But once you move away from the regular meeting of the planning commission, you're in a special meeting, and if it's not on the agenda, you don't talk about it.
I understand. So how are you planning on making sure that we're well informed? I mean, like, for example, I
Can I-
see here, everybody is a winner, and can you give, can you give us an update? Or
So the
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I think you made a good point about, what is the rush, especially with the holiday and having a public discourse about this. So, seems to me, are you going to address that? I mean, is there a reason why we wouldn't want to put it off till the next month?
No, if that's your preference, that's always an option. The other thing to bear in mind, and that is, once we have a published meeting, you can always continue it to a date and time certain, so that if we get to the December meeting and we're 2 hours into it and you don't feel that we'll be able to finish it at that time, you could continue it to the January 10th meeting and everything would be pushed back accordingly, and we could adjust our schedule at that time. What you may find is that you have enough information to make a decision on the 20th, and the purpose of the meeting on the 20th is going to be to pick which scenario that you would like to recommend to the city council. And because each of those scenarios could have a different outcome for the applications that are pending that you would hear in January. So say, for example, you were to take scenario 1, where your recommendation is that there will be no change of the urban growth boundary, then, or the comprehensive plan map at all, then the analysis for the hearings in January is going to be a lot simpler, because the recommendation will be no. And but part of what I need to do is I need to be able to figure out how I'm going to construct the analysis and the recommendations for the 8 actual cases, and whether or not they're going to be consistent with the scenario that you would like to see Woodland growing to. That's really the question for December.
Is the council going to vote on those separately, the scenario and the cases separately?
So, not necessarily. Well, so they will have to make individual decisions on the applications that are pending from applicants. So that is a legislative land use application that they will have to make decisions on. They don't actually have to pick a scenario, because ultimately what they're going to have to do is adopt a new map. What they won't do is adopt a scenario map and then a separate map for each of the applicants that come along. They're going to need to make a decision on that case, and depending on what they decide on those cases, it will be rolled up into a single map, and that map is the legislative document that they will adopt or choose not to adopt.
Because what they're working to, I mean, is they are at one session is going to address all 8 applications, correct? I mean, what the idea is that they will have workshops or hearings to do something, but they can't spread that vote out over multiple sessions unless they continue the meetings, right?
Yes. From the city council point of view?
Right.
Yes, because one of the questions that Frank and I still have to wrestle with, and that is each application represents a change to the map. And ultimately, it may need to be rolled into the city's application because I will pick a map that reflects all of the recommendations from the planning commission, and that could end up being the map that is voted on by the city council. So in other words, if it's, say, scenario 6, then the map decision that they're going to adopt is going to be that map, not necessarily the individual request by each individual applicant.
Because that's one of the benefits you have, is that the city council can't make multiple decisions in a year. You can do that. I mean, you could decide a couple of applications over a period of time, because what you're doing is you're not changing the comp plan, you're making recommendations. So there are some procedural differences between how the commission operates and how the council will have to operate.
So you really can't have a final map until after our public hearings and city council vote.
That's correct. So the way I envision this occurring is the December, you're going to be giving me some direction onto how I need to analyze the 8 individual applications. Because depending on which scenario you pick, that's either going to be relatively simple or extremely complicated. Because ultimately, one of the scenarios requires that some are going to make the list and some are not. And that analysis has to be defensible to begin with. And second of all, when the map that goes to the city council, they can't do the individual case analysis like you do. Theoretically, they're going to have to pick one map and adopt it.
And the other thing is that, is that what Travis is doing is making sense, is that you come up with some sort of bigger vision of what's going to happen, so that you make sure that you're consistent when you're looking at the 8 individual pieces. But of course, what would happen is that if the council's vision, bigger vision, is different from the planning commission, that will generate different results for them. So, but it makes sense, in order to be consistent and fair to all the applicants, that you have, because that's the whole purpose of a comp plan, is that you don't make piecemeal decisions, that what you do is they all fit in together. And so that's why I think Travis has done correctly, that you spend a session where you're looking at the 30,000 feet and saying, how should we do our comp plan? And then if the commission comes to that decision, then it's going to be easier. I mean, you may have disagreements, and you may disagree with decisions because you were in the minority opinion for the big picture, but it does make sense, and it does make sure that you're consistent in terms of what you're telling people, and it's not yes one time and no for the other, and they don't connect.
So it is common and customary to hold public hearings during the day time when people are working and they really have something.
No, normally they would be during the normal planning commission meeting like what we did tonight.
Right, because you're
No,
publishing
he ju-
all day sessions.
Oh,
January.
no.
Okay,
No,
that's
we're
right.
2 nighttime just like this, 2 Thursday nights consecutive from 7 till, hopefully 7 till 9, and then 7 till 9 the next week, as opposed to 7 till 1 in the morning.
Okay, because that was one of the things that the first thing I saw on your email that you sent, I thought it was going to be the Tuesday session.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
And if you, even without continuing, if you don't finish up on the 17th, nothing bars you from scheduling another meeting to finish up whatever you have left.
Okay, thank you for that
Absolutely, and this is a good conversation to have at this time. Figure out how you want to do your work.
What's happening on the 17th? Just remind me.
So it's a
We're having a meeting.
planning commission hearing here. So that's our regularly scheduled meeting on the 17th.
Okay.
Of January.
And we've asked for the 10th so that we could break your workload down into 2 meetings.
And what
And
is,
ask for what? The what?
The
Break
10th.
your workload into 2 meetings.
We're having a meeting January 10th also, January 10th.
January 10th?
And then January 17th, 2 Thursdays,
Okay.
One.
And December?
December
December
20th.
That's our
20th.
regular
And just
meeting.
December 20th?
Yeah, that's the regular meeting.
Okay, I got a
yeah.
little confused.
and what Travis has, which makes sense, again, you can think it any way you want to, is that the internal ones, the ones that are already within the Woodland urban area would be treated as one set, because that's probably a different issue. And then the applications that involve the expansion of the urban growth area would then be a second session, or more if you need it.
And that seems like a logical break to me. On the December meeting, you could ultimately decide that you want to tackle the external expansions first and then do the internals, or you could give me instructions on how you want to handle them. Maybe you want to handle them 1 through 8 based on the application number, or you can handle them by application date. That way, the people who are in line first get their advice first, or you get your recommendation first. Depending on which scenario you want, that might be a really important call.
Well, that sounds kind of fair to me. You know, whoever applied first gets first consideration of, you're talking about bringing it before the planning commission to make a judgment about some change in the zoning or whatever they're applying for, right?
Yes, because the internal ones, their only question is comp plan designation change. The external ones have to make the argument as to why the growth boundary should be expanded, and one of them is asking for part commercial, part residential. So that's kind of a second question after the expansion question.
I thought we discussed previously the procedures as to whether to move the internal ones. It might be easier to, it's more straightforward to handle the internal ones.
Yes, that's my interpretation, and simply because we don't have to get into the urban growth boundary question.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so how do we settle this, right? Can we settle it now, or can we?
Settle what?
Can we say, we are, I'd like to make a motion to deal with the internal changes first, and that we do that in January?
I think what Travis is saying is that we want to wait and see which of these scenarios we're going to settle on before we do that.
And again, your hands are not I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea that on the 20th of December, if that's not too close to Christmas, to address that big picture, and then have a planning for the 10th, for the internal ones, and then the 17th. That does not mean that when you get to the 20th, you can't change
Okay,
that.
so that's our agenda right now.
Correct, yes, sir.
Maybe I haven't
You're
that
not,
memo.
it is a logical way to tackle the work, but you're not being stripped of discretion, and you can see where you are on the 20th. It makes sense to save it, but if on the 20th it's obvious that you need more time, then you can suspend it and continue it in January. But you should come up with a plan now. Also, you don't want to be still discussing this in July.
And that just reminded me, thank you, Frank, because it reminded me of another reason why I had picked the 20th or the December meeting, and that is because really what you'll be instructing me, the decision I'm asking you to make at that meeting, is not a recommendation on the individual applications. It's how to apply the analysis for the stuff that's coming up in January. So anybody who...
I understand that. I wanted the public to have the
anything that they might add to that conversation will really be able, they can still bring it up in January for the individual cases.
Okay.
Because the amount of influence that they would have in the December meeting is less critical than when you're actually making the key recommendations in
For
January.
specific projects.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So that was part of my thinking, so.
Piece of cake, right?
So we're just sticking with the calendar? Is that what we resolved?
Whatever y'all want to do, this is just
Okay.
a proposal to move forward.
Connie, you just want to stick with what we've got?
Well, I'm fine. I still, I don't want to be, I don't want to feel like we have to make a decision then. I think this is an important part of the public process. And if we're not done, we can postpone to January. But I do feel it's worthy of discussion because that's what we're here for. We're public planning for the city. So I just want to make sure that we give people the opportunity.
And it's important that you have quality recommendations that go up to the council.
So you want to have a public hearing on December 20th concerning this, right? That's on the agenda?
Travis will present his findings, and then we will make, there could be public testimony, but he will present his findings, and we will make a recommendation on which scenario of 1 through 6 we, wish to forward on for approval to the city council.
Well, I mean, basically, on the 20th, if you make it, you're setting up a yardstick for yourselves for what you do in January.
And I understand that because it depends on which scenario.
Right, and part of that is just the discipline of making sure, because you don't want to have, when you come up with the 8 applications, you want them to fit together with some sort of broader vision.
So by the 20th, he will have had all of these open
Oh,
houses,
okay.
and then we will have some
Plus the-
idea of what, the public is thinking.
Okay, I see.
And
So
the great
that's
thing is,
public.
again, this is a legislative function, so you are free to discuss it with as many people as you can, drum the interest, and if you start getting feedback, in terms of that's a terrible time, or it'd be better, or whatever, or why can't we have a Saturday, or whatever, that's what you can come armed on the 20th of December and figure out what you need to do. It looks like a pretty exciting process and certainly has huge issues.
Okay, so, do we have other staff reports here, or we've got that listed?
Well, I have one more question under A, 2 in our code. I still believe, joint on the city council and planning commission, our main priority is to retool the code. And I'm very concerned about, making changes to the comprehensive plan without dealing with the code. Because, I think it's absolutely critical that we update our code, so that new code rolls into a comprehensive plan in a more seamless way.
I sort of feel like the opposite should be true. I think our code should reflect this more comprehensive.
Just so you know that during the budget discussions, the issue was raised as to whether or not the city could find any money for hiring a consultant to do some of that code work. And I think specifically they were looking at revisions to the subdivision, the planned unit, the PURD code. So,
When we talked about at the meeting, we need to address, high density residential code. And both Commissioner Jones and myself made a motion to take that to city council, to see if we can hire somebody
Yep.
to deal with high density residential.
and that was taken to them, and our request budget request this year was for an additional planner, and because they did not have the funds for an additional planner, that was kind of their fallback discussion, was whether or not they could get some consulting help. So they are looking at that, and they're aware, and that was brought to their attention.
Okay, please explain to me why the PERD code will take precedence over identity.
I don't know that for sure. I think the question of what the consultant looks at is something that I would want them to, the question of whether they can find money is what they're wrestling with, what that consultant, I want to have,
A potential hire of a consultant
yes,
to deal with.
code issues. And the
But why?
PURD was brought up as the subject of the day.
We
but-
were very explicit at our joint meeting. We go back to, we wanted, at that meeting, we discussed high-density residential.
Yes, but what we want and what they want is not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you for your.
yep.
Okay, anything else on the staff report?
Nothing else.
Okay. So, are we ready to adjourn?
Yes, I'm going to be this meeting.
Okay, do I have a second? Second, okay, so all in favor of adjourning? Okay, we are adjourned at, what, 9:50? 8, sorry, 8:50. Oh, yes. Thank you, everyone.